Chapter 54. A Dangerous Start. The next 5 weeks were a whirlwind of activity at Camelot, with everyone coming and going. Salazar spent most of his time with Godric, teaching all the children everything they could. They managed to teach them to apparat safely, although Ron, Ginny, and Blaze managed to splinch themselves a few times. They weren't hurt badly enough to warrant a trip to St. Mungo's, but Poppy had a fit when Ginny lost 3 fingers and Blaze lost a foot. Ron only lost part of an eyebrow, some of his hair, and the tip of one of his fingers. With the help of Poppy though, the 3 of them were able to heal fairly quickly. Salazar and Godric didn't really need to teach Cedric to apparat, seeing as he already had his license, so the young man volunteered to continue working with Blaze, Ron, and Ginny on apparition, as the others moved on to other things. They did not teach the children the unforgivables because everyone felt like it was going a bit too far. Molly, Remus, and Minerva, who had been totally against it when the subject was first brought up, still held firm with their feelings on it, so Godric and Salazar finally let it go. However, that didn't stop them from teaching the children 2 of Salazar's curses that he had invented. He taught them his own beheading curse and leg vanishing curse, as well as the bone-crushing hex, knee reversal hex, instant scalping hex, finger-removing jinx, impediment jinx, entrail expelling curse, conjunctivitis curse, and the blasting curse. All of these were practiced on transfigured rocks though, so that no one got hurt. Godric worked with them on dueling, but before they started that, Salazar and Godric set up a duel between themselves to demonstrate exactly what they expected from the children. The whole order had shown up for that one because it was one of their nastier duels. Merlin had temporarily charmed the front walls of Camelot to be see-through, so everyone could watch them safely while they dueled outside. It lasted for a full hour and Godric won the duel, but only just barely. They had started out with wands, only to finish the last 15 minutes without them, much to the awe of everyone in the order. However, they were so beaten up from the damage that they had inflicted on each other, that Poppy threw another fit and ordered them to bed for the next 3 days. After Salazar and Godric healed, they got right back to work with the children. The children didn't use any of the nastier hexes they had been taught previously, but they used the stinging jinx and stunning spell to work on their dueling speed and techniques. Sirius helped a lot with this, as did Moody, Tunks, and Merlin. Speaking of Merlin, Albus had proposed a friendly duel to the 1700-year-old wizard, and everyone showed up once again to watch it. That duel only lasted 20 minutes before Albus found himself on his bum, but he had grinned at Merlin and graciously admitted defeat. Everyone, including Albus, suspected that Merlin had put on a good show and had let Albus nail him with a few hexes, but he denied it. After that, everyone, including the children, wanted a go at the ancient wizard, who graciously and humbly wiped the floor with all of them, but it was enough to make everyone grin and laugh. They had, after all, dueled the Merlin Ambrosius. It had been a grueling last 5 weeks of summer, but the children worked hard and practiced every waking moment. For Salazar though, it wasn't filled with just teaching. He had managed to find time to get his classroom and quarters arranged to his liking, and he found time to talk with the Potters via the mirrors. Harry was disappointed that Salazar and Godric couldn't visit for his birthday, but the lad understood why. Harry had grown up so much though, and since he was 15 now, it seemed he had changed almost overnight. He was no longer the 11-year-old who sat staring starry-eyed as he listened to stories about Hogwarts and days gone by. Instead he wanted to talk about girls and pranks. Salazar listened to him talk and couldn't help but chuckle. Harry seemed disappointed though. He had hoped to one day be able to come home to the UK and go to Hogwarts. He loved the South American School of Wizardry, but according to Harry, it wasn't the same as the stories he had been told over the years. He liked his friends, but all the stories about Hogwarts just made him want to come back where he belonged. He wanted to roam the halls and play pranks that just like his very great-grandfather, father, godfather, and uncles. He also wanted to get to know Blaise, Hermione, Neville, and the twins better. He was tired of living a secret life where no one really knew him, and he just wanted to be normal for a change. Salazar's heart went out to the lad, because he told Harry that that may never happen, seeing as the lad only had 3 years of school left. However, Salazar told him a lot could happen in 3 years. They had found 5 of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and maybe if they could pinpoint and destroy the last 2, they could kill him and get the whole thing over with. Then Harry could come home to where he belonged. Harry admitted that he hoped so. It was 3 days until school started, and everyone had gathered for the last order meeting of the summer holiday. Amelia was reporting that Fudge had been disappointed that Potter had not been spotted and captured during the back-to-school shopping days, but he was optimistic that the boy would be caught soon. This made Salazar chuckle as he remembered that day. He had wandered around Diagon Alley in his adult form as everyone went about their shopping. He even stopped to talk to a few others about why they were there, which had only made him grin as he wished them luck in their endeavor. The shopping had gone off without a hitch though. Salazar had given money to Minerva, who had escorted Draco around to get his things. They had disguised Draco as best they could, considering his height and weight couldn't be changed due to having to buy robes. They did change his hair and eye color to brown, and this seemed to work out okay. Minerva had polyjuiced herself to look like a random mole, so that helped them blend into the crowd better. Seeing as her parents were off to wherever Perenelle and Nicholas had sent them, Hermione had no money for her supplies either, so Godric took care of that by giving her galleons. Hermione had been a bit embarrassed because that was the one thing she had not thought about, but Godric assured her that it was fine. Salazar was suddenly snapped out of his thoughts as Godric lightly nudged him, and whispered that he needed to pay attention. "We just want to thank you all for the funding," Fred was saying with a happy grin. "We are done with the headless hats, and they should hold up in battle situations just fine." "These are really interesting, Mr. Weasley," Albus said with a smile, as he put the hat on. Everyone grinned as the hat and Albus's head disappeared, and when he pulled it off, everything reappeared again. "Very unique and ingenious, if I may say," Albus continued with an even bigger smile. "It will help our members in battle, and they won't be recognized by the Death Eaters, which should limit their ability to threaten our families and friends." George grinned at him. "We are also working on importing Peruvian instant darkness powder, but we need to get paperwork drawn up and signed by the proper people in the ministry. We are thinking this could help with an escape, should it be needed. We are also working on shielded clothing too, such as gloves and cloaks. It will work in the same manner as the headless hats, but instead of being invisible, you'll be shielded," Fred said. "We know that everyone can cast the shield charm, but in battle there is always someone trying to curse your back, so these items should help defend you against that. They will work just like a normal shield though, and won't protect against nastier things like the unforgivables and such. We just need to work out all the details," George added. "We were going to do that first, but remaining anonymous seemed to be more important, especially since, as Fred said, we can all cast pretty decent shield charms." "That's very interesting," Amelia said with an approving nod. "What made you think of shielded clothing?" Fred and George grinned at her. "Constant vigilance," they shouted together, which caused everyone to glance at Moody and burst out laughing. "Well, I'm glad my harping about that finally paid off," Moody said with chuckle. "Good work, lads." Albus looked around at everyone and smiled happily. "Very good, everyone. I am pleased that everything seems to be working out rather well. With that, I do believe that this meeting has concluded. Term starts in 3 days, so if you need anything from those of us who are at Hogwarts, just let us know." "Any word on who the ministry official will be?" Salazar asked, looking around the table. Everyone shook their heads, but Amelia spoke up. "I think Fudge is purposefully keeping it tightly under wraps. My guess is we will not know until the day term starts. All we have been told is what has already been said. Which is, that there will be someone watching you closely. Albus sighed with disappointment. Very well. All right then. Until next Sat. Severus suddenly hissed loudly with pain, and grasped his left forearm. All eyes shot towards him, and everyone looked slightly nervous. Tell him whatever you need to, lad, Merlin said calmly. It will be all right. Severus nodded and glanced at Salazar, who nodded very slightly. Salazar knew that Voldemort wanted to know if Severus had found out anything about the Malfoys. The meeting he called shortly after they had been rescued mostly consisted of Voldemort shouting about meddlesome ancestors, but he had also asked Severus specifically about Salazar's password book, though at the time, Severus had told him he wasn't sure. However, just as Severus stood up to leave, an elf appeared with a sudden violent crack. Nasty master, Mr. Salazar, we have a problem, Krecher said, as he wrung his hands together tightly. Severus, go, and please bring back word as soon as you can, Albus said as he jumped up. Godric and I will go to the Malfoys' hideout. Sirius, you stay here in case it's a trap, Salazar said as he jumped out his seat. If this is what I believe it to be, Merlin said as he stood. We need to bring Draco and Narcissa to Camelot immediately. I feel they are in grave danger. Is this something you have foreseen? Trelawney gasped. I believe so, Merlin said with a nod. Go quickly, all of you. Dobby, Salazar yelled, just as Severus hurried out the door. Dobby appeared with a crack, but as soon as he saw Salazar's worried face, he stared at him without saying his usual happy greeting. Dobby, Krecher, I need you to work together. Get all of Draco and Narcissa's things out of their safe house, and bring it all here please. Dobby nodded and vanished, but Krecher turned to look at Sirius, who also nodded. What Harry said, and hurry, he said, with slight panic. Winky. With a nod, Krecher disapparated, along with Godric and Salazar, just as Winky popped in. Yes, Master Sirius? She asked, looking around with wide eyes. I know you getting everything settled at Hogwarts after the move, but I need you to do something else. It's an emergency, he said, and explained that he wanted her to help Dobby and Krecher. After she left, Albus looked around the table. Perhaps we should all stick around for a while, he said, which caused everyone to nod. Do we really want Mrs. Malfoy and Draco here though? Blaise asked nervously. Merlin smiled at the young lad. Narcissa is not innocent of her past actions and feelings, but I believe she has had a true change of heart. Draco, I feel, is learning, but he's not quite there yet. In the future however, they both may become very valuable, so please treat them kindly while they are here. So why didn't we bring them here to begin with? Hermione asked. Because Hermione, some things have to happen in order for certain things to come into play in the future, Merlin said mysteriously, causing her to furrow her brow in confusion. Perenelle chuckled. My dear, if it is one thing we have learned, it is you'll never get a straight answer about the future from a seer, she said, causing Merlin to laugh and Trelawney to look slightly insulted. As Severus landed at the place he was called to, he chuckled slightly. Apparently Voldemort had decided to take up residence in the Parkinson's house. It wasn't as big as Malfoy Manor, but it was still a decent-size house. He was greeted at the door by a delighted-looking David Parkinson, and shown to a large dining room by his daughter, Pansy, who also looked equally pleased about their current state. Severus's heart filled with disgust though, as Pansy grinned up at him. It's such an honor for the Dark Lord to be here, Professor Snape. We are truly happy to be counted so worthy, she said happily. Severus only nodded at her as he entered the dining room, but as his eyes scanned the room, he was slightly startled to see Lucius bowing down before Voldemort, who looked murderous as he glared at the blonde-headed man. As everyone took their turn to bow, Voldemort's eyes never left Malfoy, and it was only after everyone had settled in that he spoke. "Lucius, you dare to come so freely? I thought you had switched sides," he said coldly. "My lord," Lucius said, bowing his head. "I was held prisoner just after we were kidnapped from your presence. It has only been since this formal call for all of us to appear before you that I have been able to come." "And your wife and spawn, Lucius?" Voldemort hissed. Lucius scowled fiercely. "Over the last 5 weeks, Narcissa has proven herself to be unworthy of me. She has adamantly demanded that I switch sides, but I told her that was never an option. I refuse to obey those meddlesome, mole-loving fools, and I do not wish to take part in their schemes against you. I despise everything they stand for, work towards, and I refuse to obey their orders and threats." "And where is the dead body of your wife, Lucius? Did you bring it to me?" Lucius hesitated a moment, but then he shook his head. "It did not occur to me to kill her, but if that is what you wish me to do in order to prove my undying loyalty, then I shall do so." "And your son?" Voldemort asked. "He is his mother's child, and over these last few weeks has showed signs of his disloyalty as well. If you wish me to kill them both, I shall do so. I can find another, more worthy wife, and birth a worthy heir," Lucius said firmly. Voldemort leaned back in his seat and studied him for a moment. "Very well, Lucius. Bring me their dead bodies, and I shall forgive you." "Absolutely, my lord." "Did anyone see you leave your safe house, Lucius?" Severus asked coldly as he tried to refrain from killing the man where he sat. "Because I know for a fact that the elf has been watching you. I ordered that stupid elf not to say anything." Lucius spat. "You are so foolish, Lucius. You didn't take into account that the elf doesn't answer to you. You are not its master," Severus replied calmly, but then he turned to Voldemort. "My lord, I have been able to uncover the fact that it was Black Self that had been watching the Malfoys. He lied, knowing that he needed to protect Dobby. He knew that if Lucius caught on that Dobby had been obliterated from his mind, that he could still call out for my elf and Dobby would be forced to appear to Lucius." Severus continued though, and chose his words carefully. "The elf, Kreacher I believe, was ordered by Black to spy on the Malfoys, which is how Potter was alerted to their situation to begin with, and how Potter was able to get past Malfoy Manor's protective wards. Despite being thrown out of the family, Narcissa still has direct black blood running through her veins. Which, as any of you with elves know, still allows family elves to gain access to those family members." Voldemort's eyes bounced around the table as everyone muttered that he was correct, but then he nodded at Severus. "And you believe that Narcissa and Draco have already been moved?" "I am fairly certain, my lord. I was told by Dumbledore that they were under a Fidelius charm with Potter as secret keeper," Severus said as he bowed his head. "As soon as Lucius left, I'm sure that elf hopped right over to Black and Potter to tell them that Lucius answered your call." "Very well," Voldemort said with a nod. "I will recant my earlier order to kill Lucius, but the order to kill his wife and son still stand. Bring me their dead bodies, and you will be rewarded." "Should be easy for Severus to kill Draco," Yaxley laughed. Severus rolled his eyes. "Not under the watchful eye of Dumbledore and Ruffin, but yes, let's have Severus kill him and get thrown out of the order," he said sarcastically. Voldemort chuckled. "Your sarcasm is always amusing, Severus. However, you are correct. You are not to make a move against Draco, for I am certain that you will lose your place in the order if you do." "Of course, my lord," Severus said, as he breathed a small sigh of relief. "Have you uncovered anything else? Anything about Potter's pork password?" Voldemort asked. Severus nodded. "I do have something. I know for a fact that Potter loves mind games. It was my first instinct to believe he was trying to shall we say mess with your head, my lord." "Mess with my head? He dares!" Voldemort hissed, as he fingered his wand and stared at the ceiling. "Yes, my lord. Potter takes great pleasure in messing with people's heads. He will say and do little things to make you doubt yourself and those around you. However, despite that, I believe that he was being direct in that instance," Severus said, as he kept his eyes alert and on the man's wand. His portc password was Merlin's house. Voldemort said as he glared at Severus. "Are you telling me that was true?" "I believe so. I was told by Dumbledore, without Potter and Ruffin present, that there is a man that Ruffin and Potter go to and get advice from, and that this man is centuries older than both of them. I went ahead and took the liberty to look into it further. We already know that Merlin was taught at Hogwarts and that he was a Slytherin, but what we all fail to realize is that Merlin would have been around 600 or 700 years old by that time. I had to greatly lower myself and actually go into a Muggle library to find the information that I needed. I found out that the Mulls claim that Merlin fought with the Mole King Arthur centuries before Hogwarts was ever created. Merlin would have had to be immortal himself by that time, and he likely came to Hogwarts as a reincarnated child during the Founder's time. It's just stupid Mulls." Crabbe scoffed. "What do they know?" "In this instance, a lot," Severus said as he glared at the man. "They claim it's myth and legend, but what they say is true." "I have to agree with Severus," Voldemort said. "While I dislike Mulls and everything they do, they oftentimes have information that we do not. I have actually read their stories about myths, legends, and magic. In most cases, what they pass off as myth and legend ends up being true. It's what makes Mulls so dangerous. If they were to ever find out that magic is real, they would start looking into their myths and legends, and we would be even more vulnerable. It's why they all must die." He hissed with loathing. "So which child at Hogwarts is Merlin?" Parkinson asked in disbelief. "He's not a child at Hogwarts, he's a fully grown man," Severus corrected. "My lord, do you recall the book Potter found in the Slytherin common room during his first year?" "I do," Voldemort said, looking at him curiously. "In that book, Salazar Slytherin said he was looking for a way to live forever. While it doesn't say how he achieved it, it did mention Merlin quite a few times. If Merlin was already immortal when he came to Hogwarts, it's safe to say that Merlin himself still lives, and that could be the man that Dumbledore said they look up to. I want your copy of that book, Severus. You still have it, I assume?" "Of course, my lord." He nodded. "Merlin, Salazar Slytherin, and Godric Gryffindor?" Lucius asked in disbelief, as he paled drastically. "Yes, I believe we are dealing with all three of them," Severus said as he glared at Lucius. "Find out for certain, Severus. If we are dealing with Merlin, I want to know for sure." "Yes, my lord." "My lord. I just thought of something," Yaxley exclaimed suddenly. "What is it?" Voldemort said, looking highly annoyed with the wizard. "That Nilrem fellow. Dumbledore's letter about Potter that was printed in the Daily Prophet said that Nilrem was Merlin spelled backwards," he answered in a great rush. Voldemort stared at the man for a moment, then he nodded. "Indeed, I now recall that tidbit of information. Severus, have you seen this man?" "Yes, I have, my lord." "As have I," Lucius said with wide eyes. "He was there the day we were kidnapped from your presence. They took us to the house in Godric's Hollow. Dumbledore, Black, Nilrem, and Moody were there, and Potter arrived shortly thereafter. They threatened us, and said that the damage we saw is what happens when you find someone. Potter even pointed out where the body of James Potter lay on the stairs, and he showed us where that mudblood died. He also said that he would tell you where to find us if he went against his wishes." Lucius scoffed. "Did it ever occur to you that you have done exactly what Potter wanted you to do?" Severus asked as he glared at the man. "Potter knows that Narcissa and Draco can be swayed. He knows the love Narcissa has for the boy, and he knows that Draco will follow his mother everywhere. You, on the other hand, he doesn't care about, and you have likely fallen into a trap," he said with loathing. Don't be daft, Severus. Lucius spat, but then he smirked as he turned to Voldemort, who was watching them both carefully. My lord, I am pleased to inform you that while we were in Godric's Hollow, Potter let slip that he placed an old, obscure, out-of-date tracking charm on you. It's 400 years old, and he smugly said that you would never find out about. You fool. Severus said as he shook his head. Potter plays mind games. What part of that do you not understand? If he said that in front of you, he did it for a reason. You're not being tracked, my lord. Lucius probably is, and he has likely led them right to us, he said, trying to remain calm. Someone find me information about that tracking charm. Voldemort shouted as he leapt out of his seat. David Parkinson paled and instantly jumped out of his seat to go search his library, while everyone else began murmuring loudly. Lucius, if there is a tracking charm on me, then you are spared, but if it's on you, he said, letting his voice trail off in warning. Lucius paled even more. P.P. Potter said it was undetectable. He stuttered, causing Voldemort to glare at him. I find it suspicious that even after the treatment I formally bestowed upon you that you would return to me so freely. Do you take me for a fool? Voldemort asked, as he paced back and forth, and caressed his wand. No, my lord. I know that I deserve to be punished for what I did, he said, bowing his head low. I returned to you on my own free will. I am not here to trick you, I am here to serve you. I find that hard to believe, Voldemort said, but then he turned to Severus. You know Potter better than anyone here, Severus. Tell me how he operates. He is a master at mind games, misdirection, and deception. For 4 years I have watched him run circles around Dumbledore. He had the man doing and believing one thing, and Potter would be doing another. All that happened in first year was Potter. It wasn't a spy, it was Potter. The hole in the castle's walls, the golden pillar, the Cerberus, and just all of it. In second year I watched him run more circles around the man as they dealt with the diary. Nolrem was a big part of second year, as was Ruffin. Potter tamed the basilisk, because it was his basilisk, and because of the events of second year. In third year the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower went right to him with information about the diadem. Fourth year he was able to thwart Lucius and his ill-thought-out plan to kill him. My lord, the boy, man, or whatever he is very cunning indeed. Voldemort stopped his pacing and looked at Severus closely. You sound like you admire him, Severus, he said coldly. Severus took a deep breath. My lord, I would be lying to you if I said I didn't, he said, causing Voldemort's eyes to flicker with anger. He is Slytherin. He is the very man we all have tried to mold ourselves after, but he's not you, my lord, Severus added, as he kept his voice steady and respectful. You, my lord, have no weakness. You are not afraid to do what needs to be done. Potter, the other hand, has a weakness, and he gets advice from Ruffin, this Nolrem or Merlin, and Dumbledore. He listens to them. Potter has a weakness, we just need to find that, and exploit it. Voldemort studied him thoughtfully for a moment. Perhaps you are right, Severus, he said, as he sat back down in his seat. But are we doing what Potter wants us to do, or is this something he doesn't expect? That I do not know, my lord, he said, still trying to keep his voice calm and even. With Potter, anything is possible. So it is. I suspect that he wants me to do something drastic. He wants me to show myself to the world, so that he is able to walk about freely. I know the Ministry is doing everything they can to find him, but something tells me their efforts will fail because he is able to hide very well. Voldemort said as he stood up and began pacing again. He is using my own temper against me, that's why he keeps popping up at random moments to tease me. I must not give in to that though. I must not. He mumbled, then he glanced at Severus. What do you think, Severus? Severus thought carefully before answering. I think you are right, my lord. Potter enjoys humiliating those he opposes, and it would give him great pleasure if he were able to provoke you, and make you do things he wants you to do. Take Lucius for example," he said, motioning to the man. "He thoroughly enjoyed knowing that you called him New Wormtail. He found it hilarious, and he didn't care about how you treated him. He admitted that to me. He said, and I quote, 'I hope he kills Lucius, so that we don't have to worry about the idiot. Then I must not do anything at all that will jeopardize my semi-quiet return, but we need to get our friends out of Azkaban. We just have to," Voldemort said as he, once again, sat back down. "I need more followers as well, and I don't know how to go about getting them without alerting the Ministry to my return." "My lord, I could help with Azkaban," Yaxley said. "We could use the Ministry against itself. We could whisper about Potter being the one who broke them out by using Dumbledore's own actions against the boy. Dumbledore told anyone who would listen that he was dark and dangerous. Potter escaped, so why shouldn't he be able to get the others out too? We could say that it's a ploy to try and get everyone to believe that you have returned. And the Ministry will believe that because they still wish to deny reality." Voldemort said with a nod. "I like that plan," he added as he gazed around the table. "Here is what we are going to do. Severus, I want you to find out for certain if this Nolram man is Merlin. Yaxley, start getting Fudge to believe that Potter is capable of anything, and the rest of you find me something about that tracking charm. In the meantime I will think up ways of gaining more followers," he said, but then he glared at Lucius. "Burn down your manor, go live in the woods, and forage for food, Lucius. Do not come to me until I summon for you. I don't trust you, and I don't want you anywhere near me until I find something about that tracking charm." Lucius gulped and paled. "Yes, my lord." Voldemort scoffed at him. "You're lucky Potter wants me to kill you, or else you'd be dead already. Hopefully you starve," he added as he turned to face the others. "I want Draco and Narcissa's dead bodies brought to me. Do this, and you will be rewarded. Now go and leave me to think." Everyone murmured as they stood up to leave, but suddenly, a ball of flames erupted right in front of Voldemort. Nahum squawked loudly before dropping something off, then he disappeared as quickly as he had arrived. Everyone backed away from the object as it stood up to face a shocked Voldemort. Severus gritted his teeth, and bit the inside of his cheek as he tried to hold back his laughter. It was a tiny animated pink Voldemort that was wearing red and gold-striped robes. "Hello!" it exclaimed happily in a very high squeaky voice, as it waved vigorously at Voldemort. "I'm your friendly Voldemort, but you can call me Tom. I'm here to spread cheer and good tidings." Voldemort glared at the offensive thing with murder in his eyes, then he raised his wand and cried, "Bombarda!" The tiny Voldemort skidded down the length of the table, but then it stood up and began to cough. Tiny Voldemort glared at a stunned big Voldemort, placed his hands on his hips, and began tapping his foot. "Now that wasn't very nice, Big Me," it shouted as it waggled its finger at him. "You and I are going to be lifelong friends." Voldemort began doing everything he could think of to get rid of the nuisance, including hitting it with the Killing Curse and Cruciatus Curse, but nothing worked and it kept coming right back to him. "Now why on earth would you try and get rid of your better half?" Tiny Voldemort said as it grinned up at Big Voldemort. "You are powerless against my good nature," it cried happily, causing Voldemort to glare at him and grind his teeth with loathing. Despite their master's current bad mood, every Death Eater at the table fought to keep straight faces. However, when Tiny Voldemort tried to hold Big Voldemort's hand, Gol Sr. snorted loudly. "Crucio!" Voldemort shouted. Gol Sr. began screaming loudly, but Tiny Voldemort began waving his arms frantically. "Don't hurt him! Don't hurt him!" it shouted as Voldemort stopped and glared at it. "How could you hurt someone who thinks I'm funny? Godric made me this way on purpose. He's a right friendly fellow, did you know that?" It's one of the reasons why I have on wonderful red and gold striped robes," he cried happily as he twirled around in circles. "Get away from me," Voldemort said through gritted teeth. "I can't," Tiny Voldemort said with a shrug. "I'm bonded to you. It is something to do with blood magic, and Godric did something, but I don't really know what it was. All I know is that I love you," it cried, throwing his arms wide open. Then it launched itself at Voldemort and latched onto his arm. "I go where you go, and you can't escape me. Isn't that wonderful?" "No," Voldemort roared as he began trying to fling the infuriating thing off of him. "Get out. All of you get out," he screamed. Every Death Eater promptly apparated. Severus landed at Camelot, and as soon as he made his way inside, he let loose with loud laughter. Albus, Merlin, Godric, and Salazar were standing in the foyer talking to Narcissa and Draco, and they all stared at him in confusion as Severus leaned against the doorframe trying to regain his composure. However, Fred and George came thundering down the stairs with shining eyes and grins plastered on their faces. "Did he like our gift, Professor?" they asked in unison. Severus snorted as he tried to straighten up, but Fred looked at his brother. Tiny Voldemort must have hit him with a cheering charm. "Probably." George grinned, as Narcissa and Draco watched everything with wide eyes. "That was you?" Severus gasped. "Yeah," they said together as they grinned. "What is going on?" Albus asked in confusion as he stared at Severus, then to Fred and George. "Here, Headmaster. Just here," Severus gasped, pulling the memory out of his head and placing it in a jar Salazar quickly summoned. 30 minutes later every member of the Order emerged from Merlin's pensive with tears of laughter pouring down their faces. "Explain." Godric grinned, as Sirius continued to laugh hysterically. "Well," Fred began as he wiped tears off his cheeks. "George and I just couldn't let go of the idea of a pink Voldemort, so we came up with this. It's why we kept asking you about the magic you used for the lions at Hogwarts. We studied everything we could find in Merlin's library about animating charms and how to make objects talk and stuff, and we finally came up with Tiny Voldemort," George said with a grin. "He is the exact opposite of Big Voldemort," Fred snorted. "He only knows one spell though, and it's the cheering charm. Which is why we thought Professor Snape had been hit with one. We hope you can forgive us for using your name Gordy, and the fact that we used Nahum. We didn't know if Nahum would take it to him, but we took a shot and asked him." He grabbed Tiny Voldemort and off he went. George laughed. Godric shook his head. "I'm not mad at all. In fact, I think it's hilarious." He chuckled. "Well, he certainly knows we are trying to provoke him into making a drastic move. No doubt he thinks this is part of that." Salazar laughed. "How can he get rid of it, and what was that bit about blood magic?" Molly asked with a slight scowl. "It's nothing really," George admitted. "It's only a diversion to make Voldemort think that. It's actually a spell we found in Merlin's library that bonds objects to certain wizards." Merlin chuckled as he nodded. "Yes, I'm familiar with that spell. It's not bad, Molly, I assure you. Voldemort will not be able to get rid of Tiny Voldemort unless he starts to love it. To break that spell, one must love the object that is bonded to them. The spell is a very old prank spell that was invented nearly 1100 years ago. It's quite ingenious, really. And I am going to have to tell him all this," Severus said as he shook his head. "I'm going to get tortured." "Only if you can't keep a straight face," Salazar chuckled, causing Severus to glare at him. Molly huffed loudly and turned to the twins. "You should have cleared this with the rest of the Order," she scolded, as he waggled her fingers at them. That seemed to sober them up a minute, but Godric only laughed. "I think it will be all right, Molly. We can say that I felt sorry for him because he's talking to a dead snake, so I wanted to give him a friend." Salazar shook his head. Only a Gryphine door, he said, causing Sirius to burst out laughing again. Albus chuckled. I agree that it should have been cleared with the rest of us, but what's done is done. Severus, be careful when you explain it to him, he said, causing Severus to sigh loudly. Then Albus turned to the rest of the order. It is very late, and I think this night has concluded. I must see that Draco and Narcissa has settled in, and I'm afraid I will have to tell them the news about Lucius. Everyone nodded a bit sadly at that statement, and they all began to leave. However, Salazar, Godric, and Merlin followed Albus out the room, and headed up the stairs to the rooms Draco and Narcissa had been shown to by one of the elves. When they entered the already open door to Draco's room, Narcissa instantly stood up, while Draco looked at them fearfully from the bed. Narcissa, Albus began gently. I'm afraid we have something that you need to be aware about, he said as he set the pensieve down on the nightstand. Is Lucius dead? She asked with a hint of unconcerned coldness in her voice. No, Albus said gently. But what you need to know concerns yourself and Draco, and we feel you need to see Severus's entire memory of the meeting, so that it helps you better understand. Draco can see it as well? She asked with a slight quiver. We think he should, Godric said softly. Although I must warn you that one of your classmates' father gets tortured. Whose? Draco asked in a quiet voice. Goyle, Salazar answered. I can do it, Mum, he said with a nervous nod. She nodded slightly and once again, they dived into the memory. When they all emerged again, Godric was trying to keep himself from laughing, while Salazar watched the two Malfoys carefully. Narcissa and Draco looked to have a mixture of amusement and fear on their faces. However, Narcissa took a deep shaky breath and sat heavily on the end of Draco's bed. I was afraid of this. I knew if he went back that our marriage was over. For the last few weeks he has done nothing but yell about being held prisoner. I told him we weren't, but he wouldn't listen. I tried so hard to hang on to him, and persuade him to see my side of things, but he just wouldn't. When he answered the call tonight, I knew I'd never see him again, she said softly, as tears welled up in her eyes. And now Lucius admits to loathing Draco and I, and the Dark Lord has officially ordered our deaths. He's after my child, she whispered in anguish, as the tears fell. It was in that moment that the full weight of the situation fell on her, and she began sobbing loudly. It took a few minutes for her to calm down, but finally she looked at Salazar and continued. I know now, that this is how your mother felt. I'm so sorry, Mr. Potter. I never understood what it meant to have the Dark Lord target you, and if your mother felt anything like I do right now, I'm so sorry that I wished him success. I'm so sorry that I felt such hatred towards you and your family. I'm so sorry, she sobbed, as she collapsed onto the floor in front of him. Please forgive me. Please forgive Draco. I beg you. Salazar bent down and gently took her hands. I do, Mrs. Malfoy. As do I, Sissy. A soft female voice said from the doorway. They all turned around as Andromeda entered the room and rushed to her sister's side. Andy, Andy, Andy. Narcissa sobbed as she clung to her older sibling for dear life. We will keep you and Draco safe, Sissy. Andromeda whispered. I promise. I never liked Lucius. You know I didn't. He cares for only himself. Lucius put on a good front and pretended to care, but now we know what kind of man he really is. He chose Voldemort over his family to save his own skin. I just want you to know that you have a home here, and later after school starts, you and I will go shopping together, just like we used to. We can disguise ourselves. It will be easy. You will be safe here, and Draco will be safe at Hogwarts. You'll see, she whispered fiercely, as she wrapped her arms tightly around Narcissa and tried to comfort her. I'm terrified to let Draco out of my sight. Narcissa sobbed, but then she looked up at Albus. Can you really keep him safe? We can. Albus said as he kneeled down next to her. We have been doing many things this summer, one of which is working on the protective wards. Merlin has invented an anti-pork ward, so no one can toss one at Draco, or any of the children for that matter. It has since been installed. Nicholas and Perenelle Flamel have created a stone that is tied to the wards. It will alert Godric, Salazar, and myself to any person who happens to turn into an animagi on the grounds. I admit it's not perfect because it doesn't stop animagi transformations, but it would hinder Minerva's teaching if we made one that stops it completely. And we already told you of the other precautions that we are taking, Godric said gently. I have also worked it out to where all 5th-year Gryffindor and Slytherins will have the same classes. The reason for that is because every professor will be able to keep an eye on all of the children, and so that Godric can also protect them. Older Slytherins will not hesitate to curse them if they are caught unawares. Albus explained. I know that seems awkward, but the children in 5th year are less powerful than those in 6th and 7th year. It makes sense, Draco said quietly as he nodded. Crabbe and Goyle aren't that intelligent, Pansy is a drama queen, Millicent is just as bad as Crabbe and Goyle, and Theo has always been the quiet one. He's really not into the whole blood thing, and I think he hates the fact his father is a Death Eater. He might be a closet neutral. The rest of our year is neutral though, like Daphne. It's the older ones like Montague we have to worry about. Can all the professors be trusted though? Narcissa asked. What about Severus? There are 2 new professors this year, one of which is Sirius. Andromeda said. He will teach creatures, and one who Salazar himself recommended, and his name is Piero Billard. He will teach defense. All of them can be trusted, Sissy. As for Severus, we can't explain the situation, but we ask you to trust us about him. He is trustworthy? Salazar said, causing her to glance at him with wide eyes. The decision to send Draco back to Hogwarts is entirely up to you, Narcissa, Albus said with a sympathetic smile. Narcissa glanced at Draco, who nodded nervously. Mum, I need to. It's OWL's year, and if I don't get my OWLs done, I can't move on to 6th and 7th. I'll need good grades in order to get a good job in the future. What about your life, Draco? She asked in a pleading tone. If we live through this, Mother, what life will I have if I don't go back to school? He asked quietly, as he stared at the bed covers. She sighed heavily, but nodded. All right, Draco, but you do everything that Mr. Ruffin and the headmaster tells you to. Yes, Mom. He nodded, as he glanced at both of them. Albus nodded. All right then. It is very late, and I suggest that we all get some much-needed rest. No one disagreed with him as they all filed out, but they were slightly surprised when Narcissa said she would like to stay with Draco for the night. Salazar understood that she didn't want to leave Draco just yet, but he was slightly surprised when Narcissa asked Andromeda to stay with them. Andromeda did without hesitation though, which seemed to make Narcissa feel much better. When Salazar arrived at his flat in Diagon Alley, he nearly collapsed onto his sofa with exhaustion. Dobby informed him that he, Winky, and Cretcher managed to get all of Draco and Narcissa's things out of Grimmauld Place, and to Camelot safely. Dobby also told him that Sirius had asked Cretcher to stay at Camelot and help look after the Malfoys, which Salazar admitted was a good idea. The last thing they needed was for Lucius to go back to Grimmauld Place and kill the cranky elf. The last 2 days of summer was slightly tense at Camelot due to Narcissa and Draco's presence, but Salazar knew that it was going to take time for everyone to adjust. After all, Narcissa and Draco were former enemies of just about everyone there. Everyone attempted to make the best of it though. Draco asked Merlin straight up if he was the real Merlin, and both Draco and his mother were shocked speechless when Merlin admitted that he was. It seemed to bring some sort of calmness and reassurance to Narcissa though, who finally seemed to relax a little bit. It was tense between Molly and Narcissa, but Molly did her best to make Narcissa feel welcome, which Narcissa seemed to appreciate. They were friendly towards each other, but were not actual friends. The only one Narcissa opened up to was Andromeda, which was understandable, seeing as they were sisters, but Andromeda told Salazar that Narcissa was coping as best she could. Narcissa was saddened over the fact she had lost Lucius, but Andromeda said Narcissa could handle it. Nothing was going to keep her from protecting Draco, and if Lucius ever made a move to kill her son, Narcissa would kill Lucius herself. And Salazar knew she would, if given half a chance. The day term started finally arrived, and Camelot was a flurry of activity. Trunks were stacked up in the foyer, and red-headed whirling dervishes were running around the castle grabbing last-minute things. It made Salazar chuckle just watching them. Everyone had decided to leave the King's Cross from Camelot, so Cedric and his parents, along with Neville and his gran, and Blaise and his mother were all standing around looking highly amused at the sight. "Fred!" Blaise shouted. "Nora just said she's going to bite you if you don't hurry up." "That's right," Nora shouted. "If you run past me again, I will bite you. Now get it together, minion." Salazar chuckled as he patted her head. "My dear, are you sure you're going to be all right this year?" "I think so, Speaker," she replied as she gazed up at him. "I can spend time pretty much wherever I want. If I want to stay in the snake pit with Jolly, Zababy, and Puny, I can, but if I want to stay in Gryffindor Tower with Bushy, Bottom, and the minions, I can do that too. Are you sure you can cope without me?" "I think I can manage," Salazar said with a smirk. They had decided that Nora would split her time with the children, seeing as it would be highly suspicious if Professor Robillard was seen with Nora hanging around him. Salazar knew it was going to be a slightly lonely year without her constant companionship, but he knew it was going to be all right. Besides, he knew he'd see her in class, seeing as the children were planning to do what Salazar had always done, which was allow her to sit on their desks. "I'm sorry, Nora," Fred gasped as he came to a stop in front of her. "I had to grab my potions kit." She eyed him carefully. "You should have packed last night like the Banshee told you to," she scolded. "I did." He grinned, as she flicked her tongue at him. After Nora threatened to bite them again, everyone finally managed to gather together in the foyer and waited for last-minute instructions. "All right everybody, listen up," Godric shouted over the noise, causing everyone to hush and listen. "If I don't make her priority number one, Nora will bite me. So with that said, who's taking her?" "Me," they all shouted together, making Nora lift her head proudly. "I feel special, but I think I should go with Bushy. She could be a bigger target if someone should get ideas," she announced. Hermione grinned at her, and gently took her from Salazar. "You have my full permission to bite anyone you need to, Nora," Salazar said. "Just make sure to keep a sharp eye out." "I will, Speaker," she assured him, as she settled herself under Hermione's robe sleeve. "Nora going with Hermione will work out the best anyway, seeing as she and Neville are prefects," Merlin said with a nod. "Don't forget to keep a sharp eye out when you are walking the train. Send for Godric if you need to." "Yes, sir," Hermione and Neville chorused. "Who are the prefects for our year?" Draco asked curiously. "Well, Neville and Hermione for Gryffindor," Salazar replied. "Susan Bones and Ernie Macmillan for Hufflepuff, Padma Patil and Anthony Goldstein for Ravenclaw, and because Severus has to play his part, Pansy and Theo for Slytherin." Draco groaned and shook his head. "Of all the people, why Pansy? Why not Millicent? She's just a duffer," he said with a loud sigh. "At least Theo can somewhat train Pansy in though. He doesn't like her much, and he only puts up with her." "You think so?" Salazar asked, causing Draco to nod. "Train is leaving soon," Moody growled impatiently. "All right, with that done," Godric said with a nod, "let's get going. Fred, George and Cedric can apparat themselves, but Blaise, Hermione, Neville, Ron, and Ginny need to be seen with an adult. It would not be good if someone were to see you operating there on your own. I'm going ahead with Nahum, so give me a 10-minute head start. If you don't get a patronus from me, you all start heading in. There is probably going to be errors on the platform, so no one panic. Draco and Narcissa will be escorted by Merlin, and they will be the last to arrive. I'll be on the platform too, you just won't see me," Salazar announced. "The train leaves in 30 minutes, so you all come in at slightly different times." "Constant vigilance," Moody shouted, causing everyone to grin at him and nod. "I'll see you all there." Godric laughed, as he and Nahum left in a ball of flames. Salazar disillusioned himself, and left in the same moment. When he arrived at King's Cross, he immediately began to scan the crowd. Godric was right though. The place was once again crawling with errors, but he saw Amelia seeing Susan onto the train. After her niece was safely on board, she began barking orders to errors and telling them to keep a sharp eye out for Harry Potter. Salazar chuckled. This hadn't been planned by the Order, but he was glad Amelia had taken it upon herself to do this. 10 minutes later, Moody arrived with Hermione in tow and Godric ushered her on the train quickly. After that, one by one they all arrived, with the Weasleys arriving all together in a big group. Everyone's eyes were alert as they scanned the crowd, but an encouraging nod from Moody set their minds at ease instantly. Salazar knew Moody could see him standing in a corner, but when an error went up to him, Salazar saw Moody shake his head. After the error walked away, Moody looked in Salazar's direction and smirked. Salazar only laughed, and was once again thankful that the older was on their side. Pretty soon it was time to leave, and as the train blew its whistle and began pulling away from the platform, Salazar sighed heavily and silently wished them all a safe trip. "Well, that was highly uneventful," Hermione said with a relieved sigh, as she plopped down in her seat. "Yeah, well, I've spelled the doors shut so no one can pop in without me undoing them," Godric said as he leaned against the door, watching everyone walk by. "Are you going to stand up the whole time, Gordy?" Blaise asked as he pulled a game of exploding snap out of his pocket. "I'll split my time between this and sitting," he replied, as Fred passed the carriage and nodded. "I still don't think it's safe for them out there," Hermione said with a frown as she watched Fred head down the train. "Fred, George, and Cedric have never sat with us before, but I think they will be all right," Godric said with a slightly worried expression. "Besides, with all of us stuffed up in here, there's no room for them anyway." "Are they coming in after Neville and I leave for our prefect meeting?" Hermione asked. "I don't know," Godric said, as he narrowed his eyes at Montague, who stopped outside the doors. He spotted Draco sitting in the compartment and glared at the blonde, but Godric blocked his view and stared the 7th year down. Montague backed up a few steps, but then sneered at him before heading off down the train. "Idiot," Ron said as he glared at the retreating Montague. "One would think they'd know who you actually are, Gordy," Ginny said. "They probably do, but they are still going to test me," Godric replied. "Nora, I want you to sit on Hermione's shoulders when you are outside this compartment. That way you can watch her back. I don't want to take any chances. Neville, you walk in front of her at all times." "Okay, Jolly. I will watch Bushy's back. If I yell shield, be ready to turn and cast one." "I will, Nora," Hermione replied, as Nora began winding her way up to her neck and shoulders. "Oh my goodness, you are heavy," she giggled, as Nora settled down and gently wrapped her tail around her neck. "Speaker feeds me well. I'm not the little worm I was in first year," Nora replied with a bit of pride. "Speaker says I'm 25 inches long and very round for my species." "If I said you were a bit fat, would you bite me?" Neville chuckled, causing Godric to laugh. "No, because to a snake, being fat doesn't matter. I still have a deadly strike range and quick reflexes." "Well, that's good to know." Blaze grinned. What did she say? Draco asked as he kept his eyes on Nora. Blaze translated what she said, as Hermione and Neville got ready to leave. Godric finally opened the door when the coast was clear. If you see heat signatures, let them know. Someone could be disillusioned, Godric said, and Nora nodded. Wow, you guys really are paranoid, Draco said when Godric closed the door. Godric grinned. Better to be paranoid than dead. You sound like Moody, Blaze snorted, causing Godric to laugh and shake his head. As Hermione and Neville made their way to the prefect cabin, they kept their eyes peeled. They made it there safely, but were met by a sneer from the Slytherin prefects. That's Potter's Snake Granger, one of the older Slytherin prefects announced. Perhaps we should alert the ministry that you have been in contact with him. Hermione rolled her eyes. Harry gave Nora to Neville just before he was arrested last year. She's been with him ever since. This is the first time I've seen her all summer. Shut up, you stupid girl, Nora warned, as she hissed loudly and glared at the prefect. Nora just warned you not to get too close. She's actually feeling a bit cranky today, Neville said. A mudblood with a snake protecting her. It's a bit odd, don't you think? Pansy sneered. Nora hissed loudly and lunged at the girl, causing everyone to shriek, but Pansy was just a hair out of Nora's striking range. Pansy still jumped backwards though, and nearly landed in Susan's lap. Get off me, Parkinson, Susan snapped, pushing her back towards Nora, who hissed again as she got too close. Pansy finally jumped up and moved to the other side of the compartment, but glared at everyone who snorted and laughed. A snake that doesn't like a Slytherin. It's a bit odd, don't you think? Padma said with a smirk, causing everyone to laugh again. Then she turned to Nora. Long time no see, Miss Nora, how are you really feeling today? Very well, I just wished I could have gotten her. It would have made my day, Nora replied, as Hermione laughed and translated. The laughter was broken up by the entrance of the head boy and girl, who were slightly startled by Nora's presence, but chose to ignore her, seeing as Nora was just as well known as Emeralda. The meeting went fine after that, and all the new prefects were introduced. They were given schedules for their shifts, but apparently Albus had the good common sense to change things around this year. The Ravenclaw prefects were to patrol the dungeons during their nighttime shifts, while the Slytherins were to patrol the first floor only. Gryffindor was to patrol around Ravenclaw Tower, while Hufflepuff was to patrol around Gryffindor Tower. Why this was suddenly mandated, no one knew, but most of them agreed that it was a good idea. It only made the Slytherins grit their teeth and glare at everyone, but one of the older Ravenclaws laughed and said it's because one trusted them, to which everyone agreed. After the train left, Salazar operated to his flat, changed into his adult appearance and teaching robes, and operated to Hogwarts in a somewhat good mood. Upon walking in the front doors, however, he was instantly thrown into a bad mood as he caught sight of Albus, Minerva, Severus, and her standing in the entrance hall. Albus, I'm not sure I can allow a 1,000-year-old, 60-foot-long basilisk to roam around the school, a high, sickly sweet voice said. Madam Umbridge, I assure you that Miss Emeralda will not cause trouble with those who don't start trouble, Albus replied ominously, as Severus and Minerva glared daggers at the offensively pink-cladded witch. It is Salazar Slytherin's basilisk, Severus said, upon seeing Salazar standing in front of the doors. If you should make a spectacle of trying to remove it, I dare say there will be more than a few people who would disapprove. Umbridge's eyes flicked to Severus and she smiled sweetly. I shall let the matter go, for now, she said, as Emeralda, who was coiled up behind Albus, Minerva, and Severus, hissed loudly. Oh Pierre, there you are, Minerva said through gritted teeth, as she tried to maintain her composure. You need to meet Madam Umbridge. She's the ministry official that will be here this year. I see, Salazar replied, as his sharp grey eyes bored holes into Umbridge's head. "You're the woman who tried to murder a 14-year-old child, if I remember correctly." Umbridge's eyes flickered with anger as Albus looked on with amusement. "The boy was already a murderer," Umbridge said. "Unlikely," Salazar replied, causing Umbridge's eyes to narrow slightly. Salazar knew that was the exact word Harry used at his farce of a trial, but right now it was somewhat amusing to watch her squirm under his glare. "And just who are you?" Umbridge asked sweetly as she tried to diffuse the tension in the air. "Pierre Robillard. I teach defense against the dark arts. It's my first year here at Hogwarts," he said curtly. "Oh please, please somebody let me eat her," Emeralda hissed softly, causing Albus to chuckle, and Salazar's lips to twitch in amusement. It was all right though. Harry had already told Albus that Pierre could understand Parseltongue. "I see. Well, you and I need to talk, Professor Robillard, because the Ministry wishes to discuss the seriously lacking standards regarding defense." "I assure you, madam," he sneered, causing Severus to smirk a bit, "that I am perfectly capable of teaching defense. I don't need any help from the Ministry." "Yes, but nothing," Salazar said, cutting across her. "If you wish to see my lesson plans, I shall happily give you a copy." Umbridge glared at him for his insolence, but then she smiled again. "The Ministry wishes you to teach defense a certain way," she said, pulling a stack of parchment from her ungodly pink bag. "Please look over this, and get with me if you have any questions. I realize that you already had the children buy their own textbook, but the Ministry has taken the liberty to provide textbooks of their own, and we wish you to teach from those instead. They are on your classroom desk." Salazar took the stack of parchment from her and nodded curtly. "I'll look them over." "See that you do," she said with a slight huff, and turned to walk off down into the dungeons. "Perhaps I should escort her around," Albus said, giving Salazar an amused smile. They watched him walk off, but Minerva sighed with irritation when they were out of earshot. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked, looking at him with slight concern. "I'll be fine, but she'll be lucky if I don't kill her before the year is over." "Can I eat her, master?" "If I kill her, my dear, I will need your assistance to dispose of her remains," Salazar replied, as Severus translated for Minerva, who looked at him with wide eyes. "I want you to watch her as best you can, and I also want you to listen to conversations going on in the Slytherin common room." "I understand, master." "Are you really going to teach that nonsense?" Severus asked, motioning to the parchment in Salazar's hand. "She explained to us that the Ministry doesn't want the students to be taught practical defense, only theory." Salazar looked revolted at the very thought. "Why would they do that?" he asked in shock. "Because they think we are breeding an army to take over the Ministry," Minerva replied as her lips pressed into a thin line. "That is the stupidest," Salazar began, only to be cut off as Albus and Umbridge swiftly made their way back into the entrance hall. "That so-called snake pit needs to go, Albus. The Ministry can't condone such a secluded place. Who knows what those children will be up to down there," Umbridge said with a slight whine. "Madam Umbridge, Harry and a friend built the snake pit last year, and I'm afraid Hogwarts herself sanctioned the work. I cannot get rid of it. As for what they are up to, I suspect that is why Harry and Mr. Ruffin made the ceiling see-through," Albus said with a twinkle in his eye. "Yes, well, Harry Potter is not here this year and I demand it be discontinued. Ruffin, Malfoy, and Zabini will have to go back into their proper rooms in Slytherin House." "Good luck getting Goldie Ruffin to agree with that," Minerva said with a huff. Umbridge scowled at her. "I see no reason for those children to be down there. With Voldemort back, those children are targets and they need to be kept safe," Salazar said, instantly causing Umbridge to glare at him. "You know who is not back, Professor Robillard, and I will not stand for such lies being spread. If you keep that up, I will have to write you a reprimand. I should warn you that 3 reprimands will have you losing your job," she said seriously. "We shall see who is right about Voldemort in the end," Salazar replied nonchalantly, as he dismissed her threat with a wave of his hand. "Albus, Minerva, Severus, I will see you all at the feast. Apparently I have papers to toss in the rubbish bin," he said, waving the stack of parchment around. Severus nodded, but Minerva and Albus smiled. "Until this evening, Pierre," Minerva said with a grin. Salazar nodded, and headed up the main staircase as Umbridge glared after him. "I can see now that Professor Robillard will be very difficult," Umbridge said as she turned to Albus. "Do remind your staff why I'm here." "Of course," Albus said with a gentle smile that caused Minerva's lips to quirk slightly. "But I'm afraid I must warn you, Pierre has been taught by the best defense against the dark arts Professor Hogwarts has ever seen. He is not likely to take kindly to anything the Ministry forces him to teach." "And who would this defense professor be?" Umbridge inquired sweetly. "My dear Madam Umbridge, you wouldn't believe me if I told you," Albus answered with a grin. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I must see that everything is ready for tonight." And with that, Albus, Minerva, and Severus walked off in different directions, leaving Umbridge alone with Emeralda. She hissed very loudly, which caused Umbridge to cry out in fright, and hurry off out the front doors. When Salazar got to his office, he scowled at the foul papers in front of him, and shoved them roughly into his desk. "Theory only. They're balmy," he thought as he shook his head. He knew this year was going to be tough, but with that woman here, he was going to be hard-pressed to keep his temper under control. He chuckled to himself, but realized he needed to form a plan and quickly. He knew he was likely to lose his job by the end of the year, and Godric was likely to get expelled, but they were just going to have to work around that. It's not like Salazar needed the money, or Godric needed the grades, but if the both of them could split Umbridge's attention, it would keep her focused on them instead of the other students and professors. It was a tentative plan at best, but it was the best he could come up with in such a short span of time, and he knew it was likely to change as the year wore on. When the evening rolled around, Salazar finally came out of his office and entered the Great Hall. The train had just arrived, and he knew that soon the students would be entering the castle. He knew that Godric and the children made it through the trip without incident, because they would have gotten a patronus if they hadn't. However, as Godric entered with the children, Salazar knew something was terribly wrong. Godric was scowling fiercely, and the others looked less than pleased themselves. He glanced at Sirius and Severus, who were seated on either side of him, and down the table towards Albus, who seemed to be puzzled as well. "What do you suppose is wrong?" Sirius whispered as he glanced at Salazar. "I don't know," he replied. "Perhaps we are about to find out," Severus said, as he very slightly motioned to the Creevy brothers who had just entered. They did not look happy either, and Dennis was having a hard time restraining his older brother. "Harry Potter is not a liar or a murderer, you idiot." "Yes he is. Now shut up, Creevy," a fourth-year Ravenclaw bellowed. "Well, that explains everything," Sirius muttered darkly. "I wonder how widespread that belief is?" "We will find out one way or the other." Salazar sighed, but then he glanced at Severus, then back at the Creevy brothers. "Severus, Sirius and I are new here, perhaps you should," Salazar said, just as a Hufflepuff boy jumped into the fist fight that had just broken out. Severus sneered at him, but that only made Salazar chuckle. They had agreed on a professional, if not slightly friendly relationship. It would be a nice change of pace for the both of them, seeing as their past public relationship had been downright hostile. Everyone at the staff table looked slightly amused as Severus swooped down like a bat on the fighting fourth years, who instantly broke apart and scattered after someone shouted Snape. That, however, didn't stop Severus from rounding them all up and hauling them out of the great hall. They came back several minutes later looking on the verge of tears, but Severus had a smirk planted on his face, and that made both Sirius and Salazar snort loudly. Creevy had the audacity to yell at me about you being innocent, so I gave him detention every weekend this month, Severus whispered. You shouldn't be so hard on him, Salazar whispered back, causing Severus to smirk slightly. I wasn't, he drawled. I could have made it until Christmas. Salazar tried to hide a grin, but he failed as Sirius snorted once again. They quieted down and became somewhat serious as Minerva led the first years in. Like she did every year, Minerva sat the stool and the sorting hat down, and backed away with a smile as the brim opened up. Only this time it didn't sing a song, instead it spoke a poem. Of the four there are the two of whom you must take heed. Best friends they were, and brothers in arms, they went to whoever in need. Ravenclaw would always say they can never be torn apart. And then one day Slytherin left, and it broke poor Gryffindor's heart. When the snake returned, the lion sprang up, and they stood tall once more. But it wasn't against each other, despite the myth and lore. To those of you who are confused, just note this next fair warning. For two of Hogwarts' own are here, and they will be watching. With lion claws and basilisk fangs, they are ready to catch their prey. They will find out your secrets and disrupt your plans, no matter what others may say. Hufflepuff would tell you, if she were here and standing. If you mess with the lion, the snake will strike, but you will never see him coming. For those of you who are innocent, you have nothing to fear or worry. But beware Dark Lords and Ministry, for you will be truly sorry. To those of you who think you are smarter, you better guess again. They built this castle together, and know its secret twin. I press upon all of you who dare to cast this aside. Hogwarts has a motto, and it bodes ill for the coming dark tide. The Great Hall was still and silent as everyone stared at the hat with wide eyes and shocked faces, but then they all jumped as the Great Hall's doors flew open. Emeralda came slithering in with Nahum and Fawkes perched on top of her head. The poor first years looked absolutely terrified that they would be eaten, but Emeralda slithered towards the Gryffindor table in order to make her way to the front, where she stopped and stretched out her large body in front of the head table. Fawkes and Nahum took a good look around the Great Hall, then they burst into a song full of harmony. It didn't last long, but when they were done, both phoenixes took flight and circled the Great Hall in opposite directions, before disappearing in a ball of flames. Then they instantly reappeared on the shoulders of their respective companions. Godric was grinning like the fool he was, and Albus's eyes were twinkling like mad as he stood up with Fawkes still perched on his shoulder. All hailed the shrew and peacocks. Nora suddenly shouted from the Gryffindor table, breaking the silence and causing those who understood her to burst out laughing. Albus looked at her and chuckled loudly. "Well said, Miss Nora. Now, I must say that was most unusual, but thank you to Fawkes, Nahum, and Miss Emeralda for that wonderful display of friendship and solidarity. To the Sorting Hat, thank you for your excellent and timely words of warning," he said with a smile, as Hat bowed its top in acknowledgement. "Minerva, I do believe we are ready to sort our first years now," he added with a nod as he sat back down. She smiled and nodded at him, then she began to call out names from the parchment in her hand. Despite that though, whispering broke out among all the tables, including the staff table. "I think the hat basically just told everyone that you two are still alive," Sirius whispered. "Yeah, but I think it will be all right. They don't know who we are exactly," Salazar said with a grin. "I suppose that's true." Severus smirked. "But I guess I better look displeased at this news," he said, as he glared around the Great Hall, causing Salazar to chuckle lightly. Once the sorting was finished, Minerva left with the stool and hat, and when she arrived at her place at the head table, the feast started, Most were still talking about the hat's poem though, because Salazar could hear snatches of conversation coming from those students who were sitting closer to the head table. "I think Slytherin is the basilisk, and Gryffindor is Dumbledore's phoenix. I bet they are animagi," one Ravenclaw said smugly. "I heard a rumor that Slytherin lives below the school in a secret chamber. They say he is very old and frail," a Hufflepuff mentioned. "What about what the hat said about Dark Lords and the Ministry? Could Potter be telling the truth?" a Gryffindor asked nervously. On and on it went, and Salazar couldn't help but chuckle, because none of the new rumors about him and Godric were true. It was really quite amusing to listen to. Once the feast was over, Albus stood up once again, and the great hall hushed instantly as all the food disappeared. "Now that we have all enjoyed the feast, I must make the yearly announcements. I would like to remind all students that the Forbidden Forest is just that, forbidden. Also please be aware that there is no magic allowed in the corridors, and Mr. Filch, our caretaker, has a list of all banned items listed on his office door, should you find yourself inclined to take a look at it. With that said, there has been 2 changes in staffing this year. Hagrid had to go away for a short time, so in his place for gamekeeper and care of magical creatures Professor is Sirius Black." Albus exclaimed happily, as Sirius stood up to take an over-exaggerated bow, which caused Salazar to shake his head and grin. The children and Godric let out loud whoops and whistles from their tables, while the other students clapped politely. Albus chuckled and continued. "Next, I would like to say that Professor Lupin had to take some personal time off, so I am proud to introduce you to your new defense against the dark arts professor, Pierre Robillard." Salazar stood up with a crooked grin, and winked at each of the children as they stood up to cheer loudly. Albus started talking again though, as Salazar sat back down. "I must warn you all that we have a new addition to our staff this year. She has been sent by the Ministry to make sure you are all learning as much as you can. Please welcome Madam Under Secretary to the Minister, Dolores Umbridge," Albus said, though he had lost the jovial tone he had carried before. Salazar kept his eyes on Godric during this introduction, and he was not disappointed. Godric's head snapped angrily to Umbridge, and even at this distance he could see the fire blazing in his best friend's dark green eyes. Godric was at his trial, so he already knew who Umbridge was, but to have Albus announce it and make it official, seemed to set Godric on edge as he snarled in Umbridge's direction. "Let me go, Bushy. I'll bite her, I'll bite her. She tried to kill Speaker. Eat her shrew. Get her." Nora yelled, causing Salazar to jerk his head in her direction. "Nora, no." Hermione screeched loudly, just as Nora managed to wiggle out of her grasp. She fell with a flop onto the table and made a mad dash for the floor. No one tried to stop her though, seeing as Neville already tried and nearly got bit because of it. Nora, however, wasn't about to be stopped. Slithering faster than Salazar ever saw go before, he sat there in shock as she streaked around Emeralda's tail, and headed right for Umbridge, who had stood up when she had been introduced. Umbridge was standing in front of the head table now, and was glaring at Hermione, who had interrupted her when she yelled, but Umbridge caught sight of Nora barreling her way towards her. She yelped loudly and tried to backpedal, but slipped and fell on her bum. Then she did the unthinkable as Nora continued to streak towards her. "Avada Kedavra!" Umbridge yelled. "No!" Salazar bellowed, as the green light left the tip of Umbridge's wand. He jumped out of his seat, which sent his chair crashing to the floor, and vaulted over the head table. Nahum was there in a flash though, and took the full brunt of the killing curse. Then he exploded into flames, and was reduced to ashes in an instant. Nora stopped still in shock, but then she turned a murderous glare on Umbridge. "You killed the peacock!" she shouted, then she darted for Umbridge again. Salazar was trying to get to her as fast as he could, but between Emeralda thrashing this way and that, he slipped and fell on the end of her tail. but panic gripped his insides as Umbridge frantically raised her wand again. Avada Kedavra! She shouted. Salazar was slipping and sliding all over Emeralda trying to get to Nora, but it was Godric that caught the killing curse that time. More than a few people began screaming as he baseball slid between the curse and Nora, who had almost reached Umbridge. Salazar could see the horror on everyone's faces the moment the killing curse hit Godric, but in the every next moment, Godric had twisted himself around, so that the killing bounced off him, and shot over everyone's heads and crashed into the back wall. Stupefy! Salazar shouted, instantly stopping Nora, who was still trying to get to Umbridge. The great hall fell silent as everyone stopped to catch their breath a moment, but when Godric stood up, and everyone's jaw dropped. Godric was seething as he towered over a wide-eyed, trembling, and babbling Umbridge. Every window in the great hall began rattling ominously as Salazar, who had already scooped up Nora and put her in his pocket, began backing away from Godric slowly. In that same moment, everyone in the know took it as their cue to do the same. Umbridge was still on the ground staring up at Godric, just as every window in the great hall exploded outward when Godric started yelling at her. A killing curse? In a room full of children? Have you lost your mind, you stupid woman? He bellowed. Why didn't you have the good common sense to cast a stunner? Why would the killing curse be the first thing that pops into your stupid little brain? Answer me. You were. Hit with it? Yes, I know. Thank you for pointing out the obvious. He roared. Is this what the ministry has come to? They send sniveling, whining, murdering, crooked politicians to a school, where at the first sign of trouble their first instinct is to cast a killing curse. I thought that Snake W was going to bite you? Great conclusion, you hideous woman. Nora is a snake. She would have bitten you, but you wouldn't have died. You have got to be the stupidest person I have ever seen in my life. It's no wonder why you wanted to murder Harry the first chance you got. Umbridge's eyes narrowed as she scrambled to her feet, and she suddenly took on an expression of pure loathing as she tried to straighten her robes and regain her composure. Now see here, mister. Ruffin. And don't forget it, you stupid witch. Godric shouted, as he stood there with clenched fists. So you're Mr. Ruffin? She said with deadly seriousness. Well, I think. Shut up. Salazar suddenly said, causing Umbridge's eyes to snap to him. You fail to see the real problem here, so don't get mad at him. You were the one stupid enough to cast a killing curse in a room full of children, not once, but twice. Luckily for Miss Nora, she has several friends who are willing to take one for her, but you fail to understand something. And what is that, Professor Robillard? She snapped. Your killing curse bounced off this young man, Salazar replied, as he stared right into her eyes. The entire room became quiet, and in the next moment several people gasped, including Umbridge herself. I guess killing curses do bounce. Godric shouted as he glared at her. I told you Harry was innocent. Colin shouted from the Gryffindor table. Madam Umbridge, I think you should take what you have learned here tonight and alert the proper people. My godson, if he isn't dead, should have his trial re-looked at, Sirius said through gritted teeth, as he glared at her. Umbridge's eyes bounced all around the room. Most of the students were still staring around in shock, but the other professors glared at the woman. I see what this is. Umbridge gasped, as she carefully inched her way around Salazar and Godric. This is a plot. Yes, this is a plot. You all confounded me and forced me to cast that curse. Are you mad? Blaise suddenly yelled in disbelief. Stay quiet, boy. She snapped. I was just set up. Yes, that's what it was. A setup. I'm going straight to Cornelius with this. Oh, you better believe it. I will tell him you all tried to trick me, she announced just as she ran out of the room. The nerve? Minerva suddenly shouted with rage, but she tried her best to calm down when Pomona nearly trounced on her foot. This concludes our start of term feast. Prefects, see that your houses get to the common rooms. You are all dismissed. Albus said, somewhat angrily as he glared at the great hall's doors Umbridge had just dashed out of. Nearly everyone stood in unison, and mumbling could be heard as everyone shuffled out the door. Godric got Draco and Blaze out of the great hall, but all of the professors stood around and stared at each other in shock and anger. Albus took a deep calming breath, and a part of Salazar felt like he should apologize on Nora's behalf, but he knew it wouldn't look right if Pierre did it. "Is Miss Nora all right?" Albus inquired with a tired sigh. "Yes, sir," Salazar replied. "She's stunned at the moment, but I'll try to bring her around and talk to her. Hopefully she'll listen to me and calm down." "Very well," Albus said with a nod. "I don't know how well this is going to play out now, but we need to try and keep our heads this year. I do admit that Godric had a very valid point though. A stunner, not a killing curse, should have been her first thought. Let's keep our eyes and ears open this year, and we need to watch that woman closely." Everyone nodded in agreement, and then they too began shuffling out of the great hall.
I'm glad you enjoyed the video. Before we close the video, I noticed 53% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel. If you can, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment down below. Until next time, goodbye!